Hello, welcome to episode 2 of my D&D classes thing that start with my barbarian video and talking about their culture and history and whatnot. So, makes sense by going by alphabetical order to start with the bard. By start, I mean continue. That's just me not speaking properly today. So, as the bard goes, I honestly feel they're both more understood and less understood to some degree. I mean, there's a lot. I can't really point to as many good historical examples or cultural ideas as most of them tend to exist fairly obviously. But I can still do something here, and that's what I'm going to do because, well, you have a guy get all of these classes done, and the bard is definitely one of them. So, going back to ye old days, as they say. Actually, no, because no one's alive from then. Back to the Neolithic caveman times that I started with the barbarian video, because I'm gonna do that a lot, because it turns out there's a lot more inspiration that you can get there than one would immediately think. So, the bard as a concept is usually given a musical connotation, which 9 times out of 10, yes, that would be an accurate assumption. But fundamentally, at least if we're going by medieval Europe standards, the more storytellers, people who tell stories and continue the legends and tales of the ancestors and culture. So, calling them necessarily just people who play music is a little bit disingenuous, but that is a heavy element, so you'll see a lot of that here. But going back to the caveman Neolithic days, like I said, the first bards or storytellers, I would say, which were better term as storyteller, but they were definitely all that inspiration you could take, would be, funny enough, the people who did those first cave paintings would be a good example, as that's a form of artistry, and definitely something that involved telling a story of some capacity, whether or not we know exactly what the story was telling. I can imagine it involves a lot of hunting and mammoths, at least looking at them long enough. But that but another good example is they definitely would have told stories around the campfire, humanity's earliest stories, in fact. And they would have also, to some degree, been teachers, since, that would just be kind of a thing you would do back then. I'm not sure when they would become precisely common, as in widespread everywhere. I'm not sure what the population cap, the population, like, numbers you have to reach in a tribe or group or whatever before someone would probably end up taking on this specialized role. But I would imagine it would start when you have someone who can sufficiently sit around and deal with more household, village problems, who can kind of just sit around and focus on that. May I also mention that these guys will likely, as a running theme here, high on some serious caveman drugs. I mean, or shrooms, mushrooms, I don't know why I said that wrong, or whatever else they do to get completely nuts back then, I don't even want to know. But that's something else that will be kind of important, and something you might see a bit of a tale going on here, but they would have served an interesting role. They would have been the storytellers, one who tells the stories of the tribe. And of course, as telling the stories of the tribes do, they may also have put their own spins on it. I'd say it's a roughly 50-50 shot between 25 to 75 shot of them trying to purposely spin the tales to favor what they want, or the other half, for 75%, being just telling the tales the same as the bard or storyteller that told them. Early music may have also been involved here, though I'm not entirely sure the earliest evidence of when we discovered music, though I have a high suspicion we knew it by that time. But going forward in time, we now go to... Now, this isn't really a time frame, as so it is a in-between of times. I don't really have much to say of what this time would be like, but I think Bronze Age is a good example. Early Romans, or Roman time period. These people isn't really specialized as the more messengers. Some early philosophers would also kind of count, though honestly I don't really feel they correspond to D&D class, but there's elements of them telling stories like the tales of Atlantis, the Odyssey, all the stuff, Homer and the Iliad, all those old tales. Those would definitely be told by bard or storyteller-like people. Now, these people are a little bit different than your stand bard, as a lot of them would be more intellectuals rather than people who play guitar strings, but there is elements of them that I feel is worth mentioning for the sake of mentioning, because they deserve a little bit of love. These people aren't really there isn't really a good class for them beyond maybe wizard or cleric, but not like cleric, because they don't usually have a religious connotation most of the time. But it's always worth thinking about if you're trying to think of your bard as a bit more of an intellectual, or at least someone who likes walking around in togas. But going through time as we do, there's not much to say on that last one there. We go to the Dark Age bards, court gestures, bards as we think of them, going around. You know, those guys. You would have quite a good mix of these guys, as you have the classic bard we know today, the one who's only conveniently around a tavern to tell a story or walk into a place that has tall tales to say about the kingdom over, or stories, or whatever, or tales, or just plain old news. They were, to some degree, newscasters back in the day, as you do. But, as you can imagine, that would just be kind of how it works, you know? Court judges also kind of do, but that's more for the humorous side of a bard. But they do honestly work in a sense of how they do. That's where the concept comes from. I mean, D&D is based on medieval Dark Age fantasy, and that's where they come from. I don't entirely have much to say, as anything you think of, you'd probably just associate with the bard. Though, something I would get is they're probably a little less comedical than people like to give them traits for. I mean, in real life, they're probably taken a touch more seriously, though I have no real evidence to back this. It just kind of makes sense to me. But that's a personal opinion, and just something. Although, admittedly, if you ever need a good excuse of why to have one of your characters bring the entire party together, the bard playing a good song or telling a good story or something might be a good way to start. Or telling about an old treasure of gold or whatever, or the lost kingdom that has the treasure of untold riches, of course guarded by a dragon, because of course it's guarded by a dragon, because everything in fantasy of this nature is guarded by a dragon, or something of equally worse terror. That's just kind of a fantasy rule. But now we move a little bit forward, and both forward and quite a bit of time skip here. We go to what I'm going to refer to as the army bard, or what could probably be better explained as those guys with the drums who move in the armies. I mean, I don't know that probably called drummer boys, and I'm not sure. I'm sure they have a different name in more modern armies, but I'm just gonna keep calling them that drummer boys. These guys fulfill a more what you would think of as a more mechanical, relate to the mechanical nature of the bard rather than their more culture or their ideas. But it's important to remember these guys are the definition of morale boosters. They are literally designed. Their major job is to literally bang on the drums or whatever, or trumpet or whatever musical instrument they decide to walk into battle with, and literally inspire the troops to go fight. Now, I know what you're thinking, that's ridiculous, that's something you see in fantasy stories. You know, I have my drummer boy, he goes da-da-da-da-da, and then all my guys are instantly inspired. Well, yes, a lot of fantasy stories tend to sometimes give magical effects to this, or science fiction effects, or whatever, to make it more obvious, but it is a well-stated fact that people who are confident will fight better because they are confident in their abilities, and other things like that. Determined, willing to fight for what is right, or at least what they think is right. And one of the best ways to do that is to get them inspired. And what's better to inspire them than patriotic music, as all things do. And it's still kind of used today, though not obviously in the same manner. But some stuff like earphones, like parades and such, is a pretty good explanation, even if a little less military based. And you can see elements of this in like sports games, like football and such, where you have those. You can kind of see elements of this everywhere. But that's just the army bard. Now it's time to go on to the rock bard. I have absolutely really nothing to say here except for rock and roll plus bard. I mean, I know it's an obvious combination, but come on, we were all thinking of it, and I'd lose my YouTube credibilities if I didn't mention the rock and roll when talking about bard. They literally go on playing guitars. I am legally obligated to do so. I presume if you really want to make sure that you're playing the right style yourself like some kind of rock and roll guy, make sure you can call on lightning with that guitar of yours. I can assume you can take another instrument, but let's be honest, you're going to take a guitar, because that's just what you do, I guess. I don't know what to say. You could take inspiration from punk culture if you want, though that really doesn't apply in any culture that doesn't have more modern ideas. Like 1970s, 80s-ish is really when the concept of what we consider punk could really exist. But hey, you do you, I guess. I'm sure you could find a way to make it work somehow. Probably a lot of anti-elf stuff, I imagine. because that's just what you do. Although I'm pretty sure every D&D character is racist as elves, even other elves. But now we go on to the modern / future day of the bard. To be quite frank, I'm not entirely sure what would constitute a modern bard. I mean, more of the same, I guess. People telling stories and such would always apply. And I would imagine you could find elements of that in, like, YouTubers and things like that who tell stories, like History Channel. Used to be History Channel, nowadays is all mass insanity. Ugh, don't get me started on that one. But, telling stories and teaching stuff online and on TV and whatnot is probably a roughly modern equivalent. Maybe not exactly, but good enough, good enough. For the future of bards, I have absolutely no idea, though I could totally imagine some kind of implant and future soldiers that would send inspiring music to the troops. I could totally see that. I'm sure some science fiction book has done that somewhere, and if it has, then I would say link it, but I honestly don't particularly care. It's just something I'm sure someone's done at some point. But overall, for the bard and how it's going to work as far as that goes, the bard is really a storyteller in many ways. An inspiring champion and a storyteller. That's really what it is. Fundamentally, down to its core, that's what it is. And honestly, no matter where you are or when it is, there's always someone inspiring the troops and then telling the stories of the past. Or the future. Or made-up stories. Doesn't really matter. Stories are always stories, and they will always be told. And that's what the bard does. As well as inspire the trooper in D&D terms, call down lightning, because why not? But overall, I think this is more of an overview of the bard rather than the barbarian, which was more of a kind of me trying to find interesting ways to do a barbarian. But hey, you know what I mean? Next one, we move on to the cleric, which should be interesting to do. See you then.